For me, I decided I just didn't want to live my life anymore where I had to deal with agents, managers, lawyers, showrunners, other writers, and just constantly battling for external validation and approval. I just wanted to write what I wanted to write.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Kristi Piehl, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
When you meet someone, there's the LinkedIn version of their life. It's the front of the stage, the accomplishments. If you listen to this podcast, then you probably agree with me. The real insight comes when you look behind the curtain and explore the story of the person's life. Today, Daniel Rubin is going to go behind the curtain of his life with us. But let's look at the front of the curtain first, right? He holds an MFA in playwriting from the Yale School of Drama and has taught writing at Loyola University in Chicago and the University of California, San Diego. He's written for NBC and the WB and off-Broadway theater. I can go on and on. He's got famous friends. He's collaborated with people we all know. Now, that's all interesting because Daniel is a trained and an expert storyteller. But the story of his life took him from New York to LA, and the most important lessons he learned weren't from celebrities, but from farmers. Daniel, welcome to the Flip Your Script podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. So you're a New Yorker, and the kind of New Yorker that is stereotypical that maybe not everybody wants to hang out with. So tell me about that New York side of you.
Well, I come from Brighton Beach, right in Neil Simon, Woody Allen territory. My family's awesome and really good people, but definitely a lot of anxiety, a lot of pessimism, a lot of vibe of in all honesty, you felt like the shadow of the Holocaust on us. And there was just a lot of worry that that really scars a people. Not that it's funny, but it's there's a lot of just worry and stress. And my dad and again, he's a great guy, very intellectual, he was an attorney, but he really takes pride in being pessimistic. And for him, my dad's joke is that the glass is 2/3 empty. And they just a vibe that, and my mom would often tell me that that if they could screw you, they're going to screw you. So there's a lot of and I grew up in the schoolyards of Brooklyn, which were in Brighton Beach at the time. It was very scrappy. You learn to talk negatively about each other, rank outs, we called them. You always knew what people's weaknesses were. So yeah, there was a lot of edge to my upbringing, to say the least.
So you're a tough guy. You can fight, you're gritty, you've got probably a salty mouth. Well,
it's really funny. I was scrappy and I was a fighting guy, but I didn't really come from I think there's levels. I think kids from tougher neighborhoods would have kicked the living crap out of me. But I guess I think one of the moments that kind of defined my childhood was I once got thrown out of a Little League game for thinking something about an adult. There was this heavy-set guy who was the commissioner of our Little League, and he was walking past, and he was an angry, smoking, just an unpleasant person. And he was walking past our dugout before a game, and I was just looking at him, and he was the commissioner of the league, and he goes, you're out of the game. And I said, what did I do? And he goes, you were thinking it. And I literally got thrown out of the game for thinking of it. So I was thinking it, and it was rude. What I was thinking about.
That's like a Seinfeld episode right there. So you grew up in a Seinfeld episode, and
100%.
When did you know that you had a gift and a love for story and writing and storytelling?
For me, my biggest realization, I really had an obsession when I was really little with Aesop's fables. I just thought those were the coolest thing in the world. You got this little story, and then it made a point. And I remember specifically at a really young age when I was getting kind of bullied And I had thought of this fable where a wolf is bullying a sheep, and he's basically giving all these excuses why he's going to eat them, but they're all BS. Or maybe it's a lamb, a little lamb, and the lamb is like, this thing you're saying, it can't be true. And finally the wolf just eats him. And it says, any excuse will serve a tyrant. And I just remember tying the event of my little bullying incident with this story and thinking, this is so awesome. Like it just makes sense to me. Like now I know, okay, there are some people who you just can't deal with it. So I really like that. And I wrote fables when I was little. It was like the cheapskate frog, and they were kind of salty. And my mom lost her mind. My mom was a teacher, and to her credit, I think she kind of had a lot of the 60s vibe in her, where she didn't obsess on teaching me grammar. And people from Brooklyn, we don't really speak. I don't even know if it's proper. I don't know my English that well, but she felt like the vibe was, if you learn too much grammar, you would stifle creativity. And then throughout all my academic career, I was horrible in math and science. I was so bad at math that one time there was a quiz, and it said like, name the angles. And it meant like obtuse, acute. And I wrote like Leo, Phil, John. I had no idea. But with my English studies, it was the exact opposite. I would read a play. We did Shakespeare in junior high, and I just remember feeling like I just loved everything about it. I could remember everything. I understood the characters. I could talk about it. So it just was what I did. And then one great thing about being from Brooklyn is we are massive exaggerators. It's all storytelling. Everything is exaggerated. When I was in LA, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but my friends would introduce me and say, this guy created Seinfeld. This guy they would just make up things. So it was really funny. But so I do think storytelling in Brooklyn it was a major part of our culture and lives.
So you take that background and experience, you take it to LA, you become a writer at the highest level that many people aspire to, writing for TV and writing for shows that we've watched and have become part of Americana. And what was it like to be the kind of background that you had and the storyteller that you are? And you're a really smart guy. And to then go land in the middle of LA and you arrived. Did it feel like you arrived?
I had, I think, a bit of a unique kind of journey where when I first got to LA, I actually had a little detour in Chicago as a playwright. And then I went out to LA. But when I went out to LA, I got a job right away. And I thought I was the biggest thing humanly imaginable. I was just like, this is going to be easy. Got a job, and we got a nice house, and I got a fancy car. And I really thought I was a big shot. And literally the first thing that happened on the first day of the job, a veteran writer, great writer, one of the funniest guys in the world. He was one of the Full House guys. And he took me out and he basically said, kid, this show is not funny enough to be a drama. He said, it's not funny enough to be a comedy. It's not smart enough to be a drama. We're going to be out of work in a couple of weeks. And I was like, no, I don't know that. And next thing I knew, I had no job for a while. And there was so much hostility on the writing staff that I was on. When Stanley Kubrick, he moved to England. And one of the reasons they asked him, why did you move to England? He said, because LA has a whiff of menace. And I found that to be very true. It's just a very, very, very cutthroat, aggressive industry. And to be honest, I wasn't totally prepared for that. In my, as much as I like to think I was some kind of tough guy from Brooklyn, let's just say my more Woody Allen, nebbishy roots started coming back, and I started kind of withering a little bit under all that pressure.
That's so interesting, because it feels like someone from Brooklyn would be really uniquely prepared to deal with all that LA can throw at someone, but that wasn't your experience. So tell us how you ended up going from LA to Chicago. And I teased it at the beginning, but there's this farmer piece, which is where I want to spend some time talking about, because it's so interesting. Sure. So get me from LA to Chicago to on a farm.
Absolutely. That was really the major, talk about flipping one script. That was the big for me. So basically, I was in LA, and if you have a very creative vision, which I like to think I do, and an original voice, it's TV writing is very much about you join a little army, you follow the showrunner's vision, and you do what they need done. And I was also doing a lot of development pitching. Like I once sold a short story. I had to take a break, but I actually had to do a little stint as a rodeo beer vendor. And I wrote a short story about my time as a rodeo beer vendor. And I sold that to National Lampoon, and we developed it as a TV show. And we didn't sell it. We actually lost out to Reno 911. And that was a real rough break. So I had a lot of heartbreak, like unbelievable amounts of heartbreak, where you pitch a show and it gets to the very end and you just don't get on it, or the show you really want to get on, someone else beats you out. And so anyway, I worked on the last TV show I wrote for was on the WB network, and it had a lot of hype because Marta Kaufman, who created the show Friends, was running the show. And it was about four sisters in Brooklyn. My Brooklyn roots really helped me get that. But the war to get those jobs is just unimaginable. I met with Marta. I had a great meeting with her. And then she told me she was going to tell me that night if I got the job. It ended up taking 6 weeks of trying to get the job that I was told I was going to get, and I didn't get it. And then 4 months later, out of nowhere, I get a phone call saying, hey, you got this job. So, you're swinging so far back from making great money and being on the lot and thinking you're the biggest thing in the world, and you're working out with celebrities at the gym, and then all of a sudden you have no job, and then you're back in. And for me, I decided I just didn't want to live my life anymore where I had to deal with agents, managers, lawyers, showrunners, other writers, and just constantly battling for external validation and approval. I just wanted to write what I wanted to write. I just decided I didn't want to do it anymore. I just wanted to be a regular person who has a job and goes to work and puts on a suit or whatever. And my wife's from Chicago, and I love Chicago. I'm a transplant from New York, but I'm a fanatic Chicagoan. And we came home to Chicago, and I ended up getting a job with a friend where I was the marketing director for an agricultural risk management company. And so that's basically how I did it. I decided that I just wanted to disconnect my self-worth from my writing. Like there was just so much pressure in LA that you got to write a great script, and tomorrow you're going to sell a script that makes $1 million, or you're going to get on the next hit show. You're going to be on Breaking Bad. And I just didn't want that like constant longing and need to change how things were. So that took me to Chicago and to my experience with farmers.
So essentially the thing that you love to do professionally, which is write, became a chore, and it became something that was no longer fun for you.
Absolutely. It became a nightmare. I mean, I can't tell you, I mean, I had a nice amount of success, but I also had so many setbacks and failures and heartbreaks. And so often the show that I loved the most and wanted to be on didn't even get on TV. So in the thing about Hollywood, and this is so important for young writers to know, is that no one knows the value of the things, of the scripts before they get made. So it's really so much about aggression or force of will. You have to go into a room with very powerful people, and you have to convince them that what you have is a multi-million-dollar idea. And it takes a lot of ego and a lot of arrogance and sometimes a lot of unethical behavior. And I'm not bitter about it. And there are amazing writers in Hollywood, and there are great people there. And I don't want to say it's all to be too extremist about it. It just wasn't a game I wanted to play anymore. So when I got to Chicago, the vibe is just so different in the Midwest. Like you, as I know, you're a Midwesterner, and there really is a friendliness. People, in my experience, are in Chicago because they want to be in Chicago. Whereas LA, they're there to make it big. You're ordering a sandwich at the restaurant, and you could tell the waiter is looking at you like, maybe you're someone who can help him, sell his screenplay or put him in a script. And one of my favorite things about getting back to Chicago was waitresses who've been waitresses their whole lives and are just like, honey, if you do the tomato on the side, in the toast, I can take off 50 cents for the thing. And you're like, oh my God, I love you so much. You're just the greatest. But for me, the biggest thing was when I was in Chicago and I all of a sudden started making money, like I had a regular job. Because even though when you're in LA and you're working and you make a lot of money, those 6 months where you're hustling for a job and making no money, and then you've got agent fees and manager fees and lawyer fees and Uncle Sam. So it's not always the what it looks like. So when I was getting a regular paycheck, for me, the biggest thing that happened, and I think this is the whole message, if I have a message these days, is I realized, oh my God, like I have a steady job. I have health insurance. We had a little house in the suburbs. Like my daughter was happy in school and life was just unbelievably perfect. And I realized and it was really nice company to work for. And I realized I never have to write again if I don't want to. And I was getting a little sad because, I always wanted to be a writer, but I had this little voice in my head that said something it's a little corny, but it's really true, where it said, now that you've quit being a writer, I'm making big air quotes here, now you can actually really write. Because if you write, it's purely from, authentic passion, or like, why would you wake up at like 4 a.m. before a long day of work? I had to be on the train. I was on the 6:37 every day. And so I then found my voice again as a writer. I would need to write just for the joy of writing with no expectations of glory. Did I answer your question there? I feel like
you did. It's so interesting because your life it whiplashed, because you went from this crazy rat race of hustle and grit and fighting for the next gig to stability. And then you found that you really liked the stability and there were all these benefits about your writing life as well. But the visual in my head of you walking onto a farm in the middle of the Midwest, and there's a farmer with like the smell of a farm. I'm in Minneapolis, so I know what a farm smells like.
Yes.
And someone with like boots on and overalls, and they walk out and they're like, hey, Daniel, welcome to my farm. What was that like for you just culturally? And then when we talked before, I was surprised at how many lessons those farmers taught you, which is so interesting because I don't know, the tough guy from New York with this like big fancy writing, and then you walk into a farm, you probably didn't expect that you were going to learn a lot there.
No, not at all. And that's a great question. And basically when I was doing the martial art thing, these guys were very spiritual guys. And one of their core beliefs was that the universe never puts you somewhere you don't belong. And I understand there's all kinds of their issues with that, but I thought it was a cool idea. And I really decided to embrace my job. And first of all, when I was LA, is just glitz and sizzle and passion and ego and all kinds of stuff. And then I'm in this job and my boss is a guy from Flanagan, Illinois. It's a population of I think it had less people in the whole town than I had in the apartment building I grew up in. I really do. And his kind of mantra was get 3 yards and don't fumble, and never talk about yourself. It's always about the company. It's always about the clients. And he actually had an amazing story, and I had to really work hard to get him to talk about who he was because he did some great things. But what happened was they needed me to do testimonial videos with the farmers who used our product and were very successful. So I met with dairy farmers in Defiance, Ohio. I was really thrilled with there's some real cool names of little towns in the heartland. And so I'm going to Kansas. I'm going to Amarillo, Texas. I'm going to Crothersville, Indiana. I'm going to New Holland, Michigan. And my job is to interview these farmers and find out how they became successful. And each guy I meet, I notice, has this quality that it was almost bizarre, where they almost seem like the same soul, where they're just quiet, they're unaffected. And these are very, very wealthy men with huge operations who run complex businesses. And I heard the same thing again and again and again, which was, Dan, it was some version of this. Dan, I had a cow. I treated her great. I got milk out of her. I sold the milk, and then I got 2 cows. And then I did that again, and then I got 4 cows. And then and they would be like, and they would always be like, is this boring you? Is this interesting to you? And to be honest, I was like, this is really interesting to me, because in LA, I have nothing, but tomorrow I'm going to make $1 billion on my script. So this is just slow and steady wins the race. And there really is a vibe of waiting for the land to give you what it's going to give you, and dealing with weather that you can't control. And I really did love these guys. I mean, it's funny because politically we're probably very different, but I was so welcome in their homes, and they were so grateful that we traveled so far to get to them. It was so beautiful, the places. But I really did love that attitude of slow and steady wins the race. And it is funny what you did give me a quick memory, though. The first time I went to a dairy was the one in Defiance, Ohio. And they were so proud of the dairy, and I was so excited to see it. And when I walked in the room where they were milking the cows, the smell is like, if I've never been there, it was like, holy Moses. But I didn't want to be rude or disrespectful. I was just like, this is the most beautiful operation. And it was really funny. They were looking at me. They're like, you're not used to being in this thing. It was amazing. And those were really great people. So we made all these testimonial videos, and they actually did great, because the funniest thing was also that in the marketing to farmers, my boss wanted everything to look homemade, look like it wasn't made by an ad agency. And it should look like I made it in the basement. And it was just so interesting to me that so I made postcards, literally postcards that just said, they would say, attention hog farmers, or attention cattlemen. And then they'd say something really boring. And it was just so weird to me that wow, it's gotta be, and it's gotta be uncool and unsexy and unpretentious. And it's like, but this is what's so fascinating, I think, about my whole script flip, and tell me if I jump too far ahead, but everything was in ultra plain English, no adjectives, no trying to hype people. The vibe of the farmers I met was, just don't BS me, just tell me what you have to tell me, and how could you say it in as few words as possible. What was so cool for me about my journey was I really did feel that as I met these guys, and as I worked with my boss, who's the quietest guy, and at Brooklyn and Hollywood are they're just loud. Everyone's yelling at each other. You probably tell I'm yelling at you right now. But you can't get a word in edgewise. It's just chaos when you eat a Thanksgiving meal. But in a lot of times when I was with my friends and the farmers and my friends at this new company, people take their time to talk. And I was always like, say what you're saying. We don't have silent pauses in my family. But it was an awesome thing to learn to wait to speak and only say what is absolutely necessary. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the next big thing from this was starting to write my book. Should I go there?
Well, you're such a good storyteller, because now I want you to go there, but not yet. So
sure.
Hold on.
Absolutely.
Have you thought about taking that whole part of your life back to your friends in Hollywood? Because I think that would make a really good show.
I've definitely thought of that a lot, because it was, major fish out of water and everything just so different. But yeah, no, I do. And I do think I come from such a different world and have such a different attitude from the people I was hanging out with. But on the core values of being people, we got along so great. The company I worked for was a great company. It was a really righteous company that taught farmers how to use the Board of Trade to trade futures and options to mitigate their risk on their herds and on their crops. And they were so good to me. I was literally, a lot of these people, their house is on the farm. So I'm in their house, and And so often I'd be with one of the salesmen and they'd say, don't you want to just stay here and like watch movies with these people and have like popcorn? I mean, they would feed me big meals. And so in the current climate we're in, especially for having gone through the experience I've gone through, it's just so unbelievably frustrating where we get along amazing, when I'm with these people. And there's no one agitating us to not like each other or to yell at each other. We could talk about, and I talked about a lot of things with these guys, but there's no animosity, no nastiness, so for me, it was a very kind of moving experience, like to be in all these towns in the heartland and know that there's such good people. And they would come to Chicago because we would teach classes, and they'd be definitely intimidated. It was such a different world being in the heart of downtown Chicago. And a lot of times they did look like fish out of water, but they would realize that like, we're not all shooting each other on every corner. It's not the chaos that you think it is. And our deep dish pizza's genuinely amazing, and our steaks are gigantic. And it was, but that for the political moment we're in was also a huge deal to me, to know that the reality on the ground, in my experience, is just not what you're seeing in most of the media. It's just, it's so much of it's manufactured, I think. But,
well, this is what is so beautiful that everyone can take away, I think, from your story is it's really easy to say those people over there and the flyover country and all of these things, but to walk into and have a conversation with someone and to focus on what you are the same and not what you are different, and to walk into a conversation with someone really different and have a mindset of what can I learn from you, which is very different from what can I teach you. And you had that open-handed, because it was your job, you have this open-handed concept of what can I learn from you? And you both taught each other a lot. I just think that if we could all, as a society, have a conversation with someone really different from us and think about what we can learn from them and what we can take from the experience to make us better, what kind of different world would we live in? Because that's not the reality. And you're just walking proof of this. And I suspect there's farmers sitting in little tiny cafes and little tiny towns going, remember that guy from New York and LA? And he was here. And you know what he taught me? I mean, that's so cool. So tell me about what you're doing now, because you fell in love with writing again, but because you didn't have to write anymore.
Right. Without a doubt. And I actually started writing a new play. I had been a playwright before I went to LA, and in the cool thing about theater is you literally, as a playwright, people, the actor and directors, they can't change your words. Like according to the Writers Guild contracts, they literally have to ask you anything. But in LA, they own you. They can change what you write. I mean, they are going to do what they're going to do. So I started writing a play, and I got a little bit lost. And I really wanted to just take a step back and use what I was learning in martial arts and used what I was learning from watching the farmers. What we taught the farmers were principles to take the emotion out of people. I don't know how many people know this or not, but when you raise, let's say, 1,000 pigs or 10,000 dairy cows, you are investing tremendous amounts of time and money. I mean, to get all those cows healthy, to get veterinary care, to feed them, it's a tremendous risk, because if anything happens to them or milk prices collapse, you could ruin a family farm that's been around for hundreds of years, literally in like a week. It's a very high stakes thing. So we were teaching them how to, futures and options. I don't want to bore everybody with this, but basically you could sell your cows or your milk into the future. So, you could go to Hormel and say, hey, on March 4th, buy all my stuff for this price and we're good. So anyway, so that was a long-winded way of saying there are certain principles you follow that just work. Like when the price is here, do this. So again, the farmers who were successful, they grind it out step by step, patiently over the long haul. And it's kind of boring, but they make an obscene amount of money. the guys who lose all their money and ruin generations of family farms are the ones who are they think they're going to buy everything cheap, and they're going to sell everything at the top, and they're always going to buy low and sell high. And it's just not the way it is. So anyway, I started building a book of principles of writing, just a little journal to say, hey, when you set up a beginning of a story, these are the things you do. Like, this is just that. And I literally, when I was writing, I started picturing my boss sitting next to me and constantly asking me, why are you saying that? Why are you adding that adjective? Why are you getting all excited here? Just say it. Just say what you need to say so that you understand the principle. And it was it was such a cool thing to me that I was thinking of my karate friends and my farmer friends in their commitment to principles, and how this idea that I would learn writing from my time with hog farmers and dairy farmers. It just was, in all honesty, it felt really spiritual to me, because it just felt like my life had a purpose again and made sense, because I really did feel I was where I needed to be, which had I been grumpier, or I had been egotistical or angry, and I was like, I can't believe I got to write this crap. This is beneath me. I'm writing stupid postcards for hog farmers. This is BS. I'm not doing this. And if I had a bad attitude, I wouldn't have taken in those lessons. And so my book ended up being relentless about how could I strip the ideas down to the simplest way. So for example, the chapters in my book are like provoke dilemma, write characters to the top of their intelligence, earn transformations. It was like I couldn't possibly say the things any simpler. And I always would picture my heartland buddies saying, that's good. That's right. You didn't put on a show. There's no ego. And I'm convinced. So what happened was I kept this journal, and I had no intention of selling it. It was just going to help me write. But one day I really this is a pretty good book. Like this, I should try to sell this. And so I called an agent of a friend of mine, never expecting anything, but I figured I'd take a shot. And sure enough, she responded really well to it, I think because it had a certain authenticity. And I got a really lucky break, which was that her daughter at the time is in LA, and she's like, man, I'd love to give this book to my daughter. And I'm like, oh my God. So I can't help in my little spiritual journey of feeling that because my energy was right, and I don't want to sound like I'm a California, like cuckoo pants, but like, I really do believe that people give off a certain energy, and some people are angry, and some people are miserable, and some people are Eeyores, and they just bring negativity. And I think because I was open to everything, and because I just wanted to learn from people, and I wasn't stressed out, and I liked doing what I was doing, all this good stuff started falling into place. And I do think it's so important to be in the city you love. Like I didn't love LA. Some people love LA. They love the excitement. They love seeing Dustin Hoffman at the IKEA, and they love all of that. I hated every bit of it. It just wasn't my thing at all. So.
And your book is doing really well. So what's next for you? Because now you're at this place you probably never expected to be.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm kind of having a hot off the press experience for me, which is after I wrote my book it ended up taking 3 years to finish it. And I did massive research. I watched 1 million movies. I read every novel I could that would articulate the principles. I can't tell you how much I overdosed on story. And so I finished it, I think about 9 months ago. And I'm not making this up. I haven't been able to watch I haven't been able to watch TV. I haven't been able to read. And it's been really kind of freaky. Like I've been a little stressed out about it. And just recently, it all started coming back. So I started writing a new play. And now my dream is to be the first guy that I know of, and I think I know a lot about this, whoever wrote one of these books on story and then used his own book to actually write something inspired. Because a lot of these guys, they write these books, but they're not necessarily writers themselves. So it's funny, I had a little business plan for myself, which was I knew people would say, there's that nasty expression, those who teach, you teach because you can't do it. So I was like, fine, if people want to say that, I'll write my book, and then they can say that, but then I'll write my great script. So I just had an idea that I'm crazy excited about as we speak. So I'm coming back to life.
That's awesome. I love it. I can't wait to do a follow-up episode and however long it takes to. So you're, a professional storyteller. You've now written a book about story. We'll put the links on the Flip Your Script podcast website, because I think there's a lot of value for people who are interested in story and how to craft a good story. But all of us, we get to talk to other people, and we're storytellers. We're not professional storytellers, but we interact with people and we tell stories. What's the one thing we could all do to tell stories better?
I'd say if I had to pick only one, it's funny, I do think about that a lot. I think if you could only have one principle to keep in mind, it is to ask dramatic questions. And I think the easiest definition I came up with when I was working on my book is that a story is you ask a dramatic question. And by dramatic question, we just mean what will happen. So you ask a dramatic question and then you answer it. So for example, really quick, but really all that happens on the shell of Hamlet is a ghost appears and tells him you got to kill the king because the king killed me and you got to avenge the death of your dad. And then Hamlet kills the king. He thinks about it for a lot, but that's really about the structure. So I think people get bored of a story when they don't know what the question is. If you'll want, now that I say this, you'll probably notice it every time you watch a movie, but the minute you watch a story, something happens that makes you go, oh, okay, what's going to happen now? I have to know how this is going to turn out. And when you are at a party and someone is rambling incoherently, you're just thinking, what the hell is the point? This is not going anywhere. So anyway, that was ask a dramatic question, I'd say, is a really good way to keep people engaged.
Well, and it goes back to what you learned from the farmers, which is if you show up interested in what can I learn from you, it's a very different point of view from let me tell you stuff. And it's what you said about, you go to a party and you meet someone back when we could party safely and, not wear masks and you could hear each other, but let's pretend that we could do that again. And someone is droning on and on and on, and you can't even get a question in. Then you're like, I'm not even going to ask a question because I don't want to be here for another 10 minutes. So the person is telling you a story to talk at you instead of share something with you. And that's such a different mindset.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's a huge part of my book, is to talk to young writers as if they matter. I think there's an inherent dignity in telling your story, because in telling your story, you're really saying, I have something valuable to share. And one of my kind of personal passions right now, and this is actually the play I'm working on, is about you got to live your life and be authentic and be who you are and not worry about likes and shares and follows and comparison and competition. And I really worry a lot about young people. I know I sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but I think I'm right. That when a kid is you're going through puberty and you're 11 years old, 12 years old, and yet you see all these photos of this kid looking great and these popular kids and their vacations, and this one's got the car, and it goes even into adulthood. So important that's the essence of my book, is to know who you are, be in the place you belong, and write. Another key, I would cheat and give you another answer to the question you just asked me, which is also to be authentic in telling your story and to tell stories that you truly need to tell. And the vibe has to be more of, hey, isn't this interesting? This thing I went through, and what do you think of this? As opposed to just hitting people over the head with, your opinion, which is obviously, again, another big thing in our culture right now, is just insulting people and yelling at them and trying to force your opinions on them. And story really doesn't do that, I think, if it's done well.
When I tell people about this podcast, and they're like, why'd you start it? To have a platform for people to share their stories. That's it. And some people, it doesn't matter if I agree with them or not. It's not my story. It's your story. And if we can just have a platform to share stories and make it more authentic to vulnerably share stories, we would have just a better world. So I'll step off my soapbox, but that's
no. I like that soapbox, and I think you're 100% right. And I really believe that it's just, there is a lot of storytelling going on in a lot of media, and having telling a story that's authentic to you and genuinely trying to understand things, and allowing, like, another chapter in my book is about how important, it's called Attack Your Theme, where you really want to give voice to the arguments against what you believe so that you could have an honest discussion through the act of storytelling, that gets everyone to an elevated place. So yeah, no, I do think, without a doubt, story is just in the air right now. I mean, everyone is really in business and politics and every part of life. There's been an amazing, what's the hardest thing to process about having written my book is I'm a little freaked out by how much it's changed the way I see everything. Like, I just see how narrative drives everything we do, when I was studying it, you learn that we couldn't process reality without making stories. Like, there's too much information. There's senses and colors and sounds and smells, and without shaping things into a narrative, you couldn't function. Like, you wouldn't make, like, if a car, even if a little thing like a car is coming at you, like, you tell a little story about which way you're going to walk, and we couldn't navigate reality without story. So, like, it's so fundamental to who we are. And I think it decides presidential elections. It decides how much money people are going to make. It decides your career. It can shape your marriage. Like, I've been watching, I'm at that age now, I'm in my 50s now, and I see marriages dissolving, and in large part because one person gets a narrative in their mind about, this marriage has been terrible for me, and you were an awful person to me here, here, and here. And if you can't control that kind of narrative, you're going to lose your marriage. So anyway, it's just been immensely an important subject, to say the least.
And the truest story is the one you tell yourself
at
the end of the day.
Absolutely. Like, there's a million different stories I could tell about my time in LA. Like, I really believe that if I was my own enemy, I could tell you a story of how I failed and I had to leave LA because I couldn't handle the pressure. And then there's another story of, no, it just wasn't for me, and I did the work to figure out who I was, and I left when it was just time to leave. But those are two, you tell one story and you're a really unhappy person who walks around feeling like you're a failure. And it's a fascinating thing to tell a story of admitting your own weaknesses, and then suddenly you become strong. I mean, it really is an endlessly fascinating subject. I mean, I really love it to death. And I think that's why, I like to think that's why my book is resonating so far. It's early in the process, but I think people feel that it has that it really does. It has that, like, heartland simple tone. And I mean, it still sounds like me. There's still some edgy jokes and stuff, but it's just being unaffected and just telling your story your way it's really life-changing.
And I know that I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I will wrap it up. And next time I'm in Chicago, we will meet in person, because I'm a story nerd and I don't find a lot of story nerds who, like, let's talk about how would you tell Hamlet in like 2 sentences? Like, that is awesome. And not everyone thinks that that's awesome. So we'll do it in person eventually.
That'd be great.
But the last question that I ask people on the podcast is there a quote or something that helped you during difficult days or as you were in this process of flipping your script?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and I have it here right in front of me, so I want to make sure I say it exactly right. But Bob Dylan once said, "A man is a success if he gets up in the morning and gets to bed at night, and in between does what he wants to do." I love that. Just spend your life, you get one life. Do what you need to do. That was my big realization.
Thank you for sharing your
Sure.
flip your script story. And I can't wait to see what you keep putting out, because now you're doing what you love because you love it, not for any other reason. And that's such an awesome place to be.
Thanks so much for having me again.
And, there's so many takeaways for me. Don't let what you love become a chore. And then from the fighters, walk through the world, move through the world with greater authenticity. And then from the farmers, what can you learn from people who aren't like you? And at the end of the day, story, the power of the story you're telling yourself. What narrative are you believing? And do you need to flip that? There is inherent dignity in telling your story. That's what he told us, and I hope that you can find someone to tell your story to in an authentic way. My hope is that Dan's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Kristi Piehl and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share our episodes with your family and friends. Do you or someone you know have a story about flipping your script? We'd love to share it. Contact us on our website, flipyourscriptpodcast.com. To stay up to date on all things Flip Your Script, make sure to follow host Kristi Piehl on social media. You can also check out the website for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and other great episodes.